Alrighty, welcome to a special edition of the Awful Announcing Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Contis, and this week we will give a recap of the 2024-25 Awful Announcing local NHL announcer rankings. And we're going to do that with the person who put a lot of time and effort into putting these rankings together, Andrew Buchholz. And you can click on the link in the description for the full list. But before you do that, make sure you also like this video and subscribe to Awful Announcing's YouTube page if you haven't done so already. Andrew, thanks a lot for jumping on to discuss the rankings. First, we'll take a look at the top 10. But I just for like transparency purposes, what goes into compiling this list and compiling these rankings?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the same procedure we've used for a lot of our different announcer rankings across sports. The NHL ones are interesting because the last time we did them as a site was in 2020, and so a lot's changed since then. But what we do is we put out a poll. We ask respondents to grade as many booths as they want of these local booths and to grade them from an A to an F. I then convert that to numerical grades. An A is a 4, an F is a 0, and then we rank the booths by average grade. And then in the various write-ups for these, in addition to just providing the grade, I try to reflect the comments that people leave. We have separate comment sections for each booth. And so I try to reflect what people said they liked and didn't like about particular people in the booths, a particular pairing overall, and so forth. There's also some interesting stuff at times in how the grades break down, because it's possible to get a similar average grade from a lot of A's and a lot of F's, and as it is from a lot of people who just respond with C's.
Yeah, right. So yeah, you could certainly have the varying levels of you get teams that people love and they hate, and that balances it out. I think you had commented that was it the 31st team was the most polarizing, or was it the Avalanche? I think was most polarizing.
Yeah, the Avalanche team is particularly interesting and polarizing. There are a lot of people who really like them, and a lot of people who really hate them. They wound up finishing 29th out of the 32 teams, and that's Mark Moser and Mark Rycroft. And their most common grade was a C, but that was only 25.9% of votes. So their votes were split pretty much with about 20% or so across the 5 different letter grades. So it's a lot of A's and a lot of F's.
And then last place, number 32, the Boston Bruins. So you got Jack Edwards out. Judd Surratt is in there. The Bruins finished last, which is a position that they had also previously finished in with Jack Edwards. So it's not like the loss of Edwards is the reason why the Bruins finished so far down.
Yeah, interestingly, so the grades for these rankings overall were much higher than we saw in 2020. And they were also higher than we saw for most of our recent rankings in other sports. The average grade across all these booths was a 2.61. And for the Bruins, they got a 1.97. So that's significantly below that. It's not quite a C, but it's a long ways up from the 1.24 that Edwards and Brickley got in 2020. And in the comments, too, a lot of people did cite Judd Surratt as an improvement over Jack Edwards. They called him a breath of fresh air, huge upgrade, and so on. But there still are a lot of people who don't like them. What I really found surprising with the Bruins is that there was pretty much nothing negative about Andy Brickley, the longtime analyst there. There were a lot of people who did have positive things to say about him. But even with that, this group still finished at the bottom.
All right, let's jump to the top 10 now. And again, you can click on the link in the description for the full list of the 2024-25 Awful Announcing local NHL announcer rankings. Number 10, the Vancouver Canucks, John Shorthouse and Dave Tomlinson, also Ray Ferraro on that broadcast.
Yeah, so with a lot of these top 10 teams, it's people that have been there for a long time and or booths that have been there for a long time. That's certainly the case with the Canucks. John Shorthouse is a guy who's been calling the Canucks in various capacities since 1996. He started as a reporter, substitute play-by-play voice on TV, became an alternate play-by-play voice, did radio for a decade, and he's been the team's main TV voice since 2008. Dave Tomlinson's another guy. He's been there sort of off and on over the years. He was the lead radio analyst from 2010 to 17, but he's had this particular role for the last 2 years now, replacing John Garrett, who is the longtime TV guy. So the Canucks spoof is an interesting mix of they're these veteran guys, but they've only been together in this particular roles for a couple of years. Shorthouse in particular drew a huge amount of praise here. Local fans really like him, and part of that I think is his history there. His radio background also I think has given him some insight into what makes for good play-by-play in this market and what really stands out. Ray Ferraro as the substitute analyst, he got a lot of praise in the comments, and Ray Ferraro obviously has been a longtime national voice on both TSN and NBC and TNT as well. So he's a guy who's really well known and well established. Tomlinson didn't draw a lot of comments here for better or for worse, but that's still top 10 ranking, a 2.83 overall. That's nothing to sneeze at.
And then number 9, Chicago Blackhawks, and this is announcers that have not been with Chicago for too long. Rick Ball and Darren Pang, completely different broadcast crew again from the last time that Awful Announcing put these rankings out.
Absolutely, yeah, and this is one. These guys are two of the splashier team-to-team moves in recent years. Darren Payne, in addition, he's done national work for NBC, for TSN, for TNT, NHL Network. He did work locally for the St. Louis Blues for a long time, but he moved to the Blackhawks ahead of the 2023-24 season, replacing Eddie Olczyk, another longtime national guy. And then Rick Ball worked for the Canucks initially on radio. He worked for the Flames for a long time, and then this offseason, he was a big free agency acquisition by the Blackhawks. They brought him in. That move seemed to get a lot of praise in the comments. There are a lot of people who praised Rick Ball over Chris Foster's. And of course, Chris Foster's had a difficult situation stepping into the shoes left by the retiring legend Pat Foley, but he did receive a lot of negative comments in the comments here, with people noting how much better they liked Rick Ball. With Darren Payne, it was a little more mixed in the comments. There are some people who are maybe a little tired of him, saying he should retire, and that they're tired of him constantly referencing older players like Wayne Gretzky. But he received generally positive comments overall. And what's interesting is that this team, like a number of the teams in the top 10, they weren't very good on the ice. They had a pretty miserable season, and they had distribution issues with the new Chicago Sports Network. But that still led to a top 10 ranking here.
Talking with Andrew Buckholtz here on the Awful Announcing podcast, which is released every Friday morning. You can get the Awful Announcing podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We're talking about the 2024-25 Awful Announcing local NHL announcer rankings. Number 8, the New York Islanders. They may have done away with their radio broadcast, but they still have Brendan Burke and Butch Goring on TV. Surprised to see 21 Fs. Maybe those came from Ranger fans, though. What did you think of those results?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting to see that number of Fs. That's higher than a number of the groups in the top 10. I think some of that from going from the comments may be about Goring. And what's interesting here is I've done a fair number of these local rankings, and in some sports, people really get on board with homerism and really want their announcers to be living and dying with the team. At least in the people who commented in response to this rankings, homerism was almost always presented as a negative. We covered that a little earlier with some of the thoughts on the Avalanche guys. And that was the main criticism of Goring. There were people who said they like him personally, they like some of what he says, but they think he turns the whole thing into a huge homer fest. This group's interesting, though, and it was interesting to me to see how much love there was for Brendan Burke. He's a guy who's done national work for decades, but he's never really received a lot of national attention necessarily. I get like he's usually been in one of the lower national booths. He's received a fair bit of praise, but I don't know that there's a lot of people who have really taken notice of him. And in the comments, there were certainly people who had a lot of shout outs for Brendan Burke, including as an A++. It's also another thing that helped this group is that they've got a long run together. They've been working together on these broadcasts since 2016, and I think that chemistry really helped elevate them.
Number 7, the Ottawa Senators, and their it's like a Yes Network like cast of announcers. I think it was five announcers total.
Yeah.
Gord Miller and Mike Johnson are the main announcers, but 4 play-by-play voices on that broadcast that cycle through.
Yeah, so the way the TSN does regional broadcasts for a number of the Canadian teams, and in particular, the ones in Ottawa, Montreal, and Toronto are a little strange because they sort of have reserved crews for them, but they also rotate their analysts around. So Gord Miller is the main play-by-play voice for the Senators, but he also calls some Leafs games. I think he may have called some Canadians too. Jamie McLennan's actually the main Sanders analyst, but Mike Johnson works there too. And Mike Johnson is the main Canadians analyst, but also works on the Senators and the Leafs. So a lot of these TSN broadcasts have a lot of overlap. The things that do stand out with the Senators is Gord Miller, known to everyone in Canada for his long run of TSN. He's also pretty well known for some of the NBC work he did over the years, and he's still getting a huge amount of praise as a hockey play-by-play voice. Some people calling him the most underappreciated broadcaster in hockey. For the other voices, it's been a little more split. An interesting thing with the Senators is they're one of the first teams to really give a woman a significant repeated play-by-play role with Kenzie Lalonde. And one of the few really doing that at the moment. There have been some past moves along those lines with other people. And she drew some high praise, but also some high criticism. And then Matt Cohen, who's their other play-by-play voice. And this is, again, because Miller is doing some of these other things, whether it's working locally for other teams or calling international hockey or whatever. But he got pretty much just about B's and C's across the board in terms of comments on him. Mike Johnson and Jamie McLennan, they both received a decent amount of praise as analysts, but nothing that really stood out with the commenters saying this is more about Miller and the play-by-play.
And then number 6, the Toronto Maple Leafs, Chris Cuthbert and Craig Simpson on Sportsnet. But then again, Gord Miller and Mike Johnson on TSN, which you just kind of explained a little bit. But that's pretty good for Maple Leafs fans that they got the number 6 announcer. And then when he's not there, you get the number 7 announcer right behind it.
Yeah, exactly. So the Leafs situation is even weirder, and that's because of the split between Sportsnet and TSN for their games. And they've got completely different announcing crews. It's sort of like the situation with the Raptors in the NBA, except there they have Matt Devlin on play-by-play for both. Chris Cuthbert, an absolute legend in Canada. He's known a little bit south of the border for some of his NBC work. But yeah, just incredibly legendary Canadian voice on the CFL and on hockey, and especially on hockey over the last few years since he jumped from TSN to Sportsnet. Craig Simpson has been a longtime commentator in Canada, but he's a little newer to this particular role. He's held this role since 2021. He's worked for Sportsnet a long time, though, so people are familiar with him. And then, yeah, Miller and Johnson we just talked about in terms of what they do for the Sanders. The comments here, there were a lot of people. Again, this was really about the play-by-play. This was about people shouting out Chris Cuthbert and Gord Miller and saying Simpson and Johnson are mostly fine with a few complaints about them. But it was largely recognition of these long-tenured play-by-play voices who are really well-known nationally.
Talking with Andrew Buchholz here on the Awful Announcing Podcast about the 2024-25 Awful Announcing Local NHL Announcer Rankings. You can click on the link in the description for the full list. Number 5 now, the Dallas Stars, Josh Bogorod and Daryl Ray. What do hockey fans like about that announcing crew?
Yeah, so I think a lot of this, in contrast, is about the color guy in Daryl Ray. Razor Ray is somebody, he's been known for a long time. He's called Stars Games since 1996, but in different roles. He started as an analyst. He did some play-by-play at one point when Dave Strader was battling cancer. And then since 2018-19, he shifted back to analysis alongside Bogorod. Daryl Ray is he's known for national work. He's appeared in a couple of the NHL video games, and he's really well known for his vocabulary. He gets called a walking thesaurus and dictionary in the comments here, so that says a lot about what people can get from him. For Bogorod, a lot of people noted his improvement over time. They talked about the energy he brings and how he had tough shoes to fill. First after Ralph Strangus and then after Dave Strader, two very prominent, well-known voices. Bogorod came in without a ton of experience, but he's now drawing lines like has improved so much since he started and definitely goes under the radar. Superb at his job. This team also drew a lot of praise for their fairness to both teams, which goes back to what I was talking about earlier with homerism was a big critique of men, and broadcasts that were seen as fair received praise.
Number 4, the Washington Capitals, Joe Beninati and Craig Laughlin. Big year for Beninati, a top 4 finish in the awful announcing rankings, and also got to call Alex Ovechkin's goal record a couple months ago.
Yeah, and that was one of the strangest things I've seen in any sport, was where these guys are so beloved by the local fans that even though Ovechkin's record chase games got picked up nationally, which usually would mean no local broadcast whatsoever, they struck a deal where the local announcers could call the games, but basically for not a live audience at all, for a replay broadcast and for social highlights. And that wound up working out great in that we still got to hear Joe Beninati call this record tie and record break. A lot of people in the comments in these rankings had great praise for that decision, for getting to hear those calls. And on this team overall, they're a really well-established team. They've held these particular roles since 1994. However, there has been some changes there. Laughlin had some heart surgery this year, so he was out for a couple of months, but was able to come back ahead of that record. Alan May got some shout outs in the comments. He's been the normal inside the glass analyst and reporter there for the last decade and took over the main color role while Laughlin was out. But yeah, this team overall, they got a lot of praise for one of the best pairings to ever do it. Beninati got praise as might be the best play-by-play announcer around. And on the fairness front, there are some people who are like, I appreciate how they share info on both teams and criticize their own team. And they drew one really interesting line of homers, but fair. So that's an interesting way to describe it.
Number 3, the Detroit Red Wings, Ken Daniels and Mickey Redmond. And this is a pairing that has been together for quite a while now.
Absolutely. Yeah. This is one of the longest running pairings, really. Redmond's been a Red Wings TV analyst since 1985, although he does only really call home games and short road trips now. And they have substitute analysts in Chris Osgood and Larry Murphy. Daniels has been there and been the play-by-play voice since 1997. So these guys have seen a lot. They've seen some very good times for the franchise. They've seen some rougher times, like we've seen more recently. But interestingly, they drew a big jump over 2020. In 2020, when we last did these, they earned a 2.41. This time around, 3.11 and third. And there were a lot of just praiseworthy comments for them, especially for Daniel's voice in particular.
Pretty cool to see the Seattle Kraken come in at number 2. Obviously, the Kraken were not even an NHL team the last time Awful Announcings put these rankings together. But John Forslund and JT Brown coming in second.
Yeah, this is an interesting booth in that it's a big combination of the old and the new. John Forslund, well-established announcer, was with the Hartford Whalers even before they became the Carolina Hurricanes, and then with the Hurricanes for decades. Highly praised for that, and then drew a lot of praise for national work of ESPN, NBC, and currently of TNT and Prime. JT Brown, very new to the analysis game, but he's received a lot of praise for his first few seasons. And in the comments, people noted how much he's grown over time. The other interesting things with this broadcast are so that the Kraken really went out and spent here. They got a big name in Forslund as their inaugural announcer. They've since added Eddie Olczyk, also very well known prominently as an analyst for select games. They have Allison Lucan, who does regular pregame, postgame, and intermission work, but also contributes in game with a lot of stat-driven stories, and she received particular praise in the comments. And then Everett Fitzhugh, who's normally their radio guy, he chimes in here on the TV side sometimes and also drew praise. So the Kraken have really put money into their media side, and it looks like it's paid off for them in these rankings.
And then in the top spot, we have the New York Rangers with Sam Rosen and Joe Micheletti, who both just retired from calling Rangers games, but cool to see them go out on top. Where were they previously in 2020 compared to now? Like, is this did hockey fans really love them, or was part of it because they were retiring? You think that people were ranking them in that top spot?
So they've absolutely been loved for a long time. They were 5th of 31 teams in our 2020 poll and 6th of 30 in our 2016 poll. In those times, they got 2.85 and 2.78 respectively. But this is still a big jump up to the first spot and a 3.41. A 3.41 is one of the highest grades we've seen in any of these rankings. And that just speaks to the incredible amount of A's people gave them. And that was they got 68.4% A's in the grades,
wow.
which is really remarkable.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is a really, really long-established booth. Sam Rosen has been doing this for 40 years, which is incredible, getting that kind of longevity in one role with one team. And Micheletti's been working with him for the last 2 decades and is very well established before that as well. A lot of the comments really were high on Rosen in particular, and just how he's the voice of the team, how people are going to miss him, how he's the absolute cream of the crop. Yeah. But Micheletti got comments like still way underrated and provides great analysis. An interesting thing here too is that it's been announced that Kenny Albert who is the backup play-by-play voice, is going to take over Rosen's shoes here. And there were a lot of people noting that while they'll miss Rosen, they're excited to hear Albert in this role, and they think that MSG made the right choice there. So it'll be interesting to see how they do in the rankings next time around.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think it certainly helps that he's such a familiar voice for the Rangers and Rangers fans. Last thing, what is the hardest part about, or even most time-consuming part about putting these rankings together?
I think the most challenging thing is trying to make sure the comments are accurately represented. Well, this is obviously a very long article in the first place, and so we don't have room to print everybody's stuff verbatim. But I try with each of these teams to go through, look at every comment, and summarize as many as I can along similar themes, and then make it clear if it was just 1 or 2 people saying something, or if it was a wider trend. And it takes time, but I think it's worth it because these rankings are really a reflection of what fans think, and the fans who do actually watch these local games pretty often. And so they've got a lot of insight into these local broadcasts.
Andrew, thanks for jumping on to recap the 2024-25 Awful Announcing NHL local announcer rankings. Thanks for taking the time to put these rankings together as well.
Thank you for having me, Brandon.
Of course, that is Andrew Buchholz. I'm Brandon Contis. This is the Awful Announcing Podcast. Please rate and subscribe to this podcast. Please also subscribe to Awful Announcing's YouTube page. But regardless of how you consume Awful Announcing and the Awful Announcing Podcast, thanks for listening and be good.